people hear us?
Yeah.
Yay.
So maybe we're going to start off with just casual conversational questions. For example, what is happening with the union now?
Oh, okay. So I think the main thing to think about, you saw in the film a lot of tensions that came up in the organizing work, right? So people had a lot of discussions and debate. I think Natalie, right, who was the woman that had flipped, right, on the day of the elections, you know, a lot of the concerns that she had raised, particularly around Chris Smalls and the role that he played in the organizing, was reflected by a lot of other people. And so in the time since then, the kind of major updates that have happened is that one, there was a reform slate that ran to replace the leadership of the ALU, and so Chris is no longer president of the ALU. But secondly, last year Teamsters stepped in and signed an agreement to help support ALU, and so they are now officially supported by the Teamsters, which is again a national union like Natalie said in the film.
Can you talk a bit about the dynamics then between independent unions, for example, and more established unions?
I think the main thing to think about is what kind of unions exist. So if you're in the labor space, you know that there are business unions who work more closely with management than I think their workers would like them to be. There are also more general unions who are more likely to take a more militant stance in fighting for things. I think when we think about union organizing, the question of cost always comes up. Because when you do new union organizing, you are always investing the money of current union members into new organizing work. And so when you are not able to make the case that you're able to win a campaign, or that certain conditions aren't good for winning a campaign, that is when it can sometimes be, you know, it can come into question the extent to which a union would want to invest in new organizing. And I would imagine that those are conversations that were had when they went to talk with official unions. I think the other thing I would say is that you saw in the film there were a lot of, let's say, out of the box ways that they were campaigning and thinking about things. A lot of steps that you saw in the film when they went to speak with an official union were like, you know, you wouldn't do this, like why would you do this, right? So in a lot of ways, I think even though they might have benefited from knowledge that an official union might have had, they were also able to take more creative steps because they weren't working with an official union. So,
yeah, we can open up to a conversation. People want to jump in. There are people that have a wealth of experience in the labor movement, like Glenn here.
yeah. Well, Taipei.
Do you have thoughts?
I have some curiosities of, are there any labor unions in Taiwan?
Of course they are. Maybe what do you really want to know?
Well, I'm new here, so I don't know how the labor works in Taiwan at all, and if corporations here have as much of a heavy hand as they do in America in sabotaging and in like preventing unions from happening.
Well, yeah, unions in Taiwan are quite different from the US. It's very different. So there are several national federations. The oldest one is CFL, Chinese Federation of Labor, and we have another second, more democratic one, TCTU, Taiwan Confederation of Trade Unions, which was born like 20 years ago. But in my point of view, the TCTU already became more or less similar to CFL. We don't really have a very strong and democratic national centers that do the organizing works. We don't, so literally, we don't have any big unions that they are doing organizing works like those Souths are doing in the film. This is what very different in Taiwan. In Taiwan, most of the established unions, they don't organize. They don't organize at all. We have a friend who has been working in this TCTU long time ago. So, okay, I'm from Serve the People Association, which is a labor organization, we organize both Taiwanese and migrant workers. So 20 years ago, we had a friend who was working in TCT, I think almost 20 years ago. So we asked her to have a motion in the meeting, in the board meeting. What we ask is, okay, give us a very small budget. We just hire a part-time organizer. We organize for you we can go to the factory and the industrial areas to organize the factory workers. And then if there's a union, if we form a union, we will ask them to affiliate to you. But then they rejected. They rejected. So in TCTU, they don't have any organizers. They don't have any. Not to mention CFL, which is almost a garbage. I've been working there for like a few 4 years. I know how it is. So this is a very, very big difference. But there are labor organizations in Taiwan. There are many small groups, and these small groups, they already form some newer unions, trade unions. So there are three kinds of basic unions in Taiwan. It's also quite different from the US. One is, we can literally call it company union. It's composed of the workers from the same employer, under the same employer. This is the majority of Taiwan. A majority of the unions in Taiwan. And they enjoy the biggest privilege under the labor law. Okay, I'll talk about the other two kinds first. The second category, you can call it professional unions or crafts unions. It's composed of workers in the same industry, but in the same county or cities. Okay, so for example, there is a Taipei restaurant workers union. It's a crafts union or professional union. And the third category, the second category, this kind of union, they can also do the labor insurance and health insurance for the employees, for their members. So these kind of unions, they have a lot of members because in the past, the government didn't really enforce the laws a lot. So many companies, many employers, they didn't even buy the labor insurance or health insurance for their workers. So the only option the workers can have insurance is go to these unions, become their members. So that's why these professional unions, they have a lot of members, but most of them, they don't really function as unions. This is from our point of view, from the labor activist point of view. Most of them, they are like clubs, they are like associations, and the owners or the heads of these unions are usually employers. Yeah, they usually, so the restaurant owners, they can also join a union, so they can have the labor insurance too. Because otherwise they cannot have the labor insurance. The labor insurance is for the workers, so the employers can buy for their employees. But all the members in the professional unions, they can have this insurance too. So that's why the owners, they are also in the union. And the owners or the employers, they are the only ones who have the facility, the time, the resources to run the election, to run the union. So I would say most or a lot of the professional unions are associations owned by these employers, and these unions become their clubs, so they can have promotions for their business. I've seen that. There's so many unions, they sell insurances, they sell any kind of products you can imagine. It's like it became like business circles. Okay, but I'm not saying all of these unions are crabs. No, some of them, they function as unions. Like maybe you have heard some. There have been some strikes before in the past few years. The flight attendants unions, and also the pilots unions. These two unions, they are professional unions, but they are real unions. They are genuine unions. And most of the others, they are not. The third category is trade unions. like in the North America or Europe. There are workers in the same industry, but they can organize themselves. And nationwide, even nationwide. But in the law, in the Labor Union Act in Taiwan, it favors the company union. So it's about the CBA, or the collective bargaining agreement. In US, they call it contract. Like here, we call it CBA. In the company union, if you have a company union in this company, you can have the absolute percentage to initiate the CBA talk. So it doesn't matter how many members you have, even 50 you can have. But if for other kind of unions or even federations, you can also represent the workers in this company to start the talk, but you have to have 50% of the membership in this company. So this is like the election. This is just like the election here. So there are some similarities, but very different between the US and Taiwan.
If I could add on to that as well, I think you saw in the film the election process in the US. I want to be clear though that there's actually two kinds of labor law in the US, right? So one is for kind of regular unions, and then one is specifically for transportation workers, right? So if you are not in the transportation industry, you can unionize by filing to have an election first, have that election, and go shop by shop. Think about Starbucks workers, right? Where they're organizing shop by shop, you get 30%, you file for that election, and you win, you can unionize. But for any workers who work in the transportation industry, you can't organize shop by shop, you have to file for an election all at once nationally. You cannot file for a petition with only 30%, it has to be over 50, and you have to win a majority to win. And the reason for that is because all unions in the US that are in transportation are governed by the Railway Labor Act, which, rail industry transportation is really important to the economy. And so it's for that reason that unionization is more difficult for, transportation workers than other workers. But I will say, I just wanted to go back to the earlier point about unionization. Right now, only 10% of US workers are unionized, right? 90% are not in unions. And in a time right now when we're facing so much, attacks by the federal government on organized labor, you see the Trump administration take apart so many protections of, first of all, federal unionized workers, and then also the National Labor Relations Board, the Department of Labor, all these different things. In a time like this, the tendency for labor unions, especially those national ones, is to shrink, is to say, we'll just take what we can, we'll protect our current numbers, and we're not going to invest in new organizing because we can barely get by ourselves. But instead, it's in moments like this when it's so important to build that collective power and to have more unionization happen. But of course, it's difficult. It's more difficult to make happen than to say.
I have a question. Well,
Yes.
First, I was very shocked about the name of the union. This ALU is exactly the name of the union we organized. We just organized a union a few years ago in a company called ASCII. It's a subsidiary of thesis. Okay, so they're a group of migrant workers. So we organized this ASCII labor union, ALU. So we have a strategy. So we have been doing things like this for several times. We organize an ALU, but we also organize a union for their mother company, ACES. So ACES group, well, it's like loophole in the Labor Act, Labor Union Act, because as I said, the company union they have no privilege. They can represent workers to have CBA talk. Okay. But of course we want a bigger organization. So we want a bigger network. So whenever there is a company that we organize, if there's a mother company, we will try to have a company union for the mother company. But it can be okay. Sorry, I forgot to mention. The law also allows a company union can be existed in the company group or corporation group. So this group can also be a company. There can be also another company union for this whole group. So we also organize ACES group labor union. So the scope of the union can be all over the ACES groups, not only the ACES company, but also the other companies. But within the same group of workers. So my question is, sorry, go back to this. There are some salts, right? I've seen some other movies about U.S. labor movement, like the Rose and Bread, or Bread and Rose.
Bread and Roses.
Bread and Roses,
Yes.
yeah. So I know that there are activists like that, but in the end, but that movie also revealed the reality of how in the labor movement and how the workers see those activists or the organizers, because usually the organizers, they are paid by bigger unions to organize the workers there. So I wonder how these organizations work, because it's independent.
Yeah.
So where these cells come from,
Yeah.
where they are paid.
I think I would change the categories a little bit. I would categorize it as this. So you have staff organizers who are completely paid for by unions, who are not members, and who commonly can't enter the workplace, right? So they are supporting union efforts, organizing efforts outside of the workplace, right? Supporting the workers, but they're not members. And then there are salts. And salts are different from staff because they are taking the jobs, right? Many of them are actually entering the workplace. And I think what's important to understand is like salts, the kind of legality of salting, especially in association with an official union, is not entirely clear. So usually when people salt, it's not typically in direct coordination with the union, or it's not that direct, right? It's not as direct as compared to an actual staff organizer with the union. And then there are the actual members, right? So that's how I would think about the category. So the salts that you saw in the film, salting just means you enter a workplace with the intention of unionizing. So they weren't paid, right? Yeah.
So the union usually they are organized really by the workers themselves.
Yeah.
And something. Oh, that's pretty amazing.
But yeah, I mean, again, it's different every campaign, right? That structure. I will also say different unions have different ways of going about things. So SCIU is known to be very staff heavy, right? And then there are also other unions that more typically hire directly from members to become staff organizers, right? So every union is a little bit different.
Next question? Or we can have a conversation.
Yeah, I'm also curious
Yeah.
if folks just had any like thoughts from the film, anything that resonated, or yeah, I'm just curious. Feel free to share.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay,
So,
right.
For example, Amazon, I think, is a very particular company because it has such dominance in its field of online shopping. And so it's also, in some ways, a tech company in that sense. But then it is dependent on very traditional like warehouse work. So how would you see the dynamics play out in this? Because on one hand, organizing, let's say, warehouse workers is really, it's like a very long, but to have a company that has such dominance in the field and power in a sense in society is very unique.
Can you read your question one more time, right?
Like, how do you think it's,
Thank you.
what is new about Amazon, or what's particular about Amazon, and what is
Oh.
more general, or their, precedents for this?
I think the main thing is the reason for Amazon's corporate dominance today, the groundwork for that was laid in the 80s under the Reagan administration, right, when he fired the air traffic workers, when they tried to go on strike. You know, so much of U.S. labor law has been taken apart piece by piece since the 1980s, and it's why we have so much income inequality in the U.S., but it's also why this kind of organizing is unprecedented, right? Because they're up against such a large corporation, international corporation. I think to your point about it being both a tech company but also a factory company, what's interesting is that there's a lot of questions that arise as we see more of these kind of tech oligarchies, right, emerge. Just to give one example, I was a union organizer on staff with the Communication Workers of America, and they organize Google tech workers, right? And so a really strategic point that was made there that contrasts with how unionization happened in this movie was to go the direct membership route to unionize. So what this means is they did not have an election. They did not have an election, they unionized by direct membership. And so that means that whoever wants to join, right, from one Google unit, into the union can join directly. You just start paying dues and you start functioning as a union. And that was a strategic choice to do that instead of going the election route because of the difficulty that they specifically saw with organizing in tech, right? When you organize with direct membership, your power is less collectively because it means that you achieve a union without having that, supermajority or majority vote, right? But again, it's like a strategic choice. Are you able to actually achieve that vote? Do workers actually just want to start, functionally having their union right now? I think those are all strategic questions, and I think as we see more and more of what happens with the Trump administration and how labor law plays out now, if it even still exists, I think these are all strategic questions that people will continue to think about. Did I answer your question?
No, I think
Okay, I tried. Go for it. Yeah.
So like the way that you guys organize schools and workers and you guys very direct into the union, do you think that that was a strategy that you guys employed with these employees because they have more access to communication and they're sitting in front of the computer all day versus Amazon workers who only have lunch breaks? And like the bravery to approach a tent to access information, whereas the individual tech workers are looking at these things like themselves and other workers body.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that you thought of that. That's awesome. I think I want to start first by thinking about what we saw in the film. They had a lot of advantages in this unionizing effort, right? Think about how people got to work. They got on a bus stop. Everyone had to get on a bus to get to the facility. That was a place that is outside of the workplace that everybody congregated on. They also had those lunch breaks where you saw people, eating meals and things like that. That was another space to have those kinds of conversations, right? Face to face. When you think about Google Tech organizing, mostly came out of COVID when people were working remotely. And so those conversations, those water cooler conversations, the conversations that you have to just get to know your coworker were not easy to have. And I wasn't directly involved with that campaign, but it's my understanding that that was a big consideration of that, right? Are we actually able to reach a majority vote if we aren't able to actually, meet everybody, have organizing conversations with everybody? So those are the answer to the question, right? Yeah. I think I can give a couple more examples. So last year I was supporting the unionization campaign of Delta flight attendants nationally. There are over 28,000 Delta flight attendants in the U.S. And again, because it's transportation, they had to unionize nationally all at once with the majority. So very difficult, and they're still working on it. But I think what was interesting there was we had to think about, right, just like they had their bus stops, where were the places that flight attendants gathered, right? Okay, they have a room where they're on standby as they wait for their next trip. Can we put out some literature there and have conversations? Can folks, as they're on an airplane, talk with their coworkers, right, about how their working conditions are and start building that relationship, right? So it's like with every workplace, thinking about where are the places to have that relationship building process is so important. And again, it just goes back to like what a union is, right? A group of workers with really strong relationships that carry them forward to do things.
I have a question about the process of taking industrial action. And so a bit of context, I'm from Australia, involved in labour organising there. And in order to do something like a strike, you need to be at a period of negotiation with your employer about your enterprise agreement, essentially, right? So that comes up every 4 years if you have one of those in your workplace. And then there's a vote amongst all staff, whether they are members of the union or not. And if there's a simple majority of votes, then you can legally take what's called protected industrial action. If you strike or do any other kind of industrial action outside of that period, it's considered illegal, right? If you do take this protected industrial action, there's also like essentially like a government department or a court that can rule those legal actions illegal if they're considered to potentially cause economic harm. I think anyone that understands like labour organising, it's like the point of taking a strike is to cause some form of economic harm, at least to the employer, right? So we've seen those kinds of laws used to outlaw what would be considered legal strikes otherwise, or at least hand down large fines directly to the union and also to union leadership. So that's for trade unions have had that done to them. The nurses union has had that done to them. So I guess I'm wondering what labour law looks like in other countries and what the process would be like in both in Taiwan, but also in the US. So I guess like with I think with New York State, right? There are a few different Amazon warehouses. It's this one in JFK that where they actually get the union. What's the process for the union taking industrial action there? Could workers in other warehouses that aren't associated with the union take the same kind of industrial action?
Okay, that's a great question, and I would love to hear from them as well how that process works in Taiwan. I think I'll share what I am able to know, what I do know about strikes in the U.S. And I don't know the specifics about where negotiations currently are right now with the Amazon Labor Union. I know that Teamsters has tried to engage, but of course the Department of Labor right now is in shambles. And so it's a little bit difficult to say what taking industrial action will look like completely. I think I would divide it into two things. So again, labor law in the U.S., we have general labor law, and then we have the labor law for transportation unions. Labor law in the U.S., generally speaking, it's kind of similar to what you described insofar as during contract negotiations, you take that vote, you vote yes to threaten a strike, and then you actually go on that strike, right, in negotiations. The times when that would be struck down would be, one is if you're a public sector employee, then it goes state by state. So in Massachusetts, where I'm from, public sector employees are actually not legally allowed to go on strike. But they are in other states. Of course, unions can still go on strike regardless. Actually last year, I think over 5 different teachers unions in Massachusetts went on strike, won great contracts, but are needing to fight it in the courts right now, or pay extremely high fines for taking that action. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is, when we think about transportation unions, right, it's a lot more messy because the right to strike is not dictated necessarily by member vote. It's, you're in contract negotiations stall, the Department of Labor steps in to basically act as a third party. If they continue to stall, there's a 30-day cooling off period, and then you can vote to strike. But the actual, at the very end of that timeline with when you actually strike, it actually goes to Congress, and then it goes to the president. So it's very restrictive. But it actually means that there's a lot to do in between then in terms of actually preventing a strike to happen. One thing that my former union that I was staff at, the Association of Flight Attendants, was really famous for is chaos strategy, or cause havoc all over the system. This was piloted in the 1990s with Alaska flight attendants, where essentially during contract negotiations, when things stall, we vote on that strike, right? And you essentially have people intermittently striking across the system without prior notice. So, that is clearly causing a lot of economic damage to airline companies, and we don't want that, and that has delivered a lot of great contracts as a result. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. Again, a lot of things are not legal, but it doesn't mean that a union might not strategically decide to still take that action. Yeah. And of course, we're waiting on May Day for general strike. 2028 as UAW President Trump. Okay, Lenny, you can talk about what it looks like in Taiwan.
Whatever you heard in the US, in Taiwan it will be more restricted. So in Taiwan, the only way to have a legal strike is you have to fail a settlement first. Okay, and it's very, very strategic that the government divided the different issues into 2 big sectors. The disputes in the Labor Standard Act, the Labor Dispute Act, they separate the complaints the complaints into two different categories. One is the rights issue, 权利事项 rights issue, and another is 条件事项 or a justifiable issue. So actually, most of the issues are rights issues, and rights issues are not strikeable. Okay, so like salaries, your salary is not paid fully, or most of the issues are like this in the workplace. Like you're not paid fully. There maybe the calculation of the overtime is not correct. These are all rights issues. So how to solve the rights issues? You can only complain. You can complain to the labor office. You can have a settlement, and then that's done. If you are not satisfied, you can sue. Right? You cannot strike. So only the justifiable, adjustable issues are strikeable. But sometimes it can be explained in different ways. I tell you one very famous story of the railway union, like 20 years ago. They won the strike vote. So the issue is because the government the government in Taiwan they are trying to privatize all the public or the state enterprises. So the first step will be corporatize. They make this entity into a company first, like what they did into the railway. Have you noticed the railway has become a company now?
It's not the Taiwan Railways Administration,
Yeah,
it's not the Taiwan Railways Corporation.
Yeah, now it's a company. So that's the first step. And then they will make it a stock company. And then they will sell the stocks. And then after they sell 50% of the stocks, is privatized already. Like what they did to Telecom. Telecom was like that. Even the government still holds the majority of the stocks, but legally that's a private company. So anyway, so 20 years ago, the union of the railway, Taiwan Railway Union, they tried to stop the privatization. So there was a group, they had like this, not the stalls. There are some organizers, so they went in to work with them. So there's a small community. So there are organizers, my friends. Not really my group, another group. They went inside to work with the labor union. So they already decided in the beginning they have to have a strike. They have to have a strike to stop the privatization process. But how to? So they found a very tricky way. They put a complaint to the labor office to raise the salary for everyone, for all the workers, for 10,000 NT dollars. 10,000 NT. That's impossible. That's a super big number. It's totally impossible. But that's already an adjustable issue. So they made the right issue as an adjustable issue. So of course they failed. In the settlement, the company is not a company yet. It was still under the Ministry of Transportation yet. Okay, so it was still the administration of the Taiwan Railway under the Ministry of Transportation. So they failed the settlement. So they can have a strike vote. So it's also very strategic how they do it. Because the railway workers, they are everywhere in Taiwan. Even Taiwan is not that big compared to the US, but it's still quite big. The workers, they have to work in the station, right? All the stations, and they are working on the trains too. So of course they are living everywhere. So how can they gather together to vote? So they made the General Assembly. In the past, the law has been changed a little bit, but in the past it's super hard. You have to have a General Assembly, so you have to gather all the workers in the same place to have a vote. Okay, so you have to have 50%, at least 50% to join and then to vote. So they have a General Assembly in front of the presidential building for a whole day. So the workers, in different shifts, they can come and vote. So eventually they won the vote. But so that's another thing. They didn't have a vote. Sorry, they didn't have a strike finally. because the government is stepping in to try to settle. Okay. So that's another part. When they were having the reforms in the labor laws, so they also copied the ideas of putting up period from the US. So they try to put that. I think they already put that in some strategic industries, like railway, water, electricity, all these things. They didn't really ban the strike, but there's a period. So even if you win the strike vote, there will be a 30 days so the government can get in to try to negotiate. But actually, in the past years, MOL, the Ministry of Labor, they have been very, very active on breaking the strikes. But on the other hand, they try to negotiate. They try to help the unions to have a negotiation. So usually, there was a deal. That's most of the cases. Even there was a strike, usually there will be a deal later because the government, they will step in to try to settle. So like, actually the union we just formed a few years ago, we won the strike vote too. But we also asked, actually, from some of us, our friends, we asked the MOL to step in to arbitrate. So there was a private settlement after that, so we didn't really have the strike. So the stories will be very, very different. How do you handle the union? How do you handle the movement? So usually in Taiwan, we don't really have the strike so often. So usually it will be settled later.
How does Amazon operate in Taiwan? They must have facilities here as well, right? So is there any sort of unionization or unification?
I will say they unionize in Japan. There is a film about it. Yeah.
An anthology of Amazon movement.
They have facilities here, like distribution centers.
I'm sure they have, but there's no union. They're like warehouse, right? So the similar unions like that, there was one, Hardcore.
Yeah.
There's a union in Hardcore. It's not so big and they're always confronting the company.
And I'm from Germany, and Amazon is pretty big in our country as well, of course, but it's really hard for our national service industry labor unions to get a foot into the door. They are very restrictive, and unionization or unionization is really widespread in Germany, but Amazon is really tough on not letting them in.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
It's an example because our labor laws are quite advanced.
Yeah.
And we have lots of rights, the labor unions, and within the companies, the labor councils we have. So this is pretty well developed, but there are, of course, these service industries that are still pretty hard to unionize.
I know, sorry, I want to follow up. I know in the German law, it's compulsory in each company there should be a workers' council, right?
Yeah.
So the unions, they also cannot really get in the workers' council in Amazon.
So usually the worker council people, they are also members of the union, of the relevant union that's usually taking care of this industry. So there's of course communication and interaction. So but certain issues are dealt within the company. So the labor council negotiates with the employer, and certain other issues on a wider spectrum that's negotiated between the union and the association of the employers. So the employers also have associations that these two groups negotiate. So it's a system divided between the company sphere and the national or the province association.
Next question.
Can you share more wins that JFK has had since the document?
It's hard to say. Very hard to say, just because frankly, like my understanding is that negotiations have stalled extremely, because Amazon has yet to enter formal negotiations. The other thing is the other tricky thing to navigate in this moment is what happens if something goes to arbitration, like it goes to the courts right now, and a Trump-appointed judge votes it down, right? So for example, right now there are certain like units of student workers on universities who can be part of a union, like graduate students, for example, right, or other undergraduate student workers. But if some part of that goes to the court and the court rules it illegal, that could potentially decertify unions. So that's actually something that, like, as Amazon, we're navigating this process right now. We're constantly thinking about, like, we want to push ahead, but also, like, what could that mean if the court strikes something down? So it's hard to say. I will say one more thing, which is that it's not a concrete plan per se, but you saw at the very end of the film that there was a warehouse in California that is also trying to unionize. There have been lots more efforts than are depicted in this film. There was an effort in Bessemer, Alabama. There was another effort that happened last year where water cannons were used on workers. It was not good, but all to say that, like, I think this is really the spark that lit a fire that is spreading across the country, and workers in the U.S. at Amazon facilities are still trying to fight. So that's really, for me, I think the important thing of this is it's like a bit of hope in this time.
Can we have the last round of questions? Okay, once, twice. Okay, so thanks for coming, everybody.
Yay. Thank you, everybody.
We'll stay with you all. If you want to catch Jane for Talk Casually, again, we are a volunteer run space. Your support is appreciated. And thanks again. Or if you can bring your glasses upstairs as well. Thank you.